Hi, I'm Dr. De Bruin, and this is another walkthrough of an A-level chemistry exam question from the amount of substance topic. This question is an extended response question about the first half of the very first required practical in AQA A-level Chemistry. There isn't a huge amount of detail that you need to know about making a standard solution, so unlike many extended response questions of this type, which tend to be level marked, this one is actually going to be 6 marking points, so that at least makes it a little bit easier to know that you have hit all the criteria they're looking for. Before we start thinking about the actual method, there are a couple of things you might want to pay attention to in this question. One thing is that they've referred to a standard solution, and this tends to be what we call it, it tends to be what we see in exam papers, but of course in your specification they actually talk about a volumetric solution. So just to be clear, they are the same thing as each other. And to explain what that is, we can look a little bit later in the question where they talk about an accurately measured mass of the acid. So the whole point of a standard solution is that we know exactly how much of the compound is in that solution. And so it might not be exactly a concentration of 0.1 mole per decimeter cubed or 0.2 mole per decimeter cubed, but the point is we know exactly how much acid we dissolved. And that may not be exactly the same thing as the amount of acid that you initially put into the weighing boat, as we'll see. The other thing to be aware of in this particular question is that they haven't made any mention of the particular concentration that we're aiming for. So whereas sometimes you'll see a question that might say you're going to make a standard solution of 0.1 mole per decimeter cubed and you might want to include a calculation in your answer, here they haven't mentioned that, so we're not going to get credit for talking about it. Now let's look at the method, and remember we're looking for 6 specific things for this half of this first required practical. The first thing you're going to discuss is accurately weighing out a dry sample of the acid. It needs to be a dry sample so that we have the ability to work out how many moles that we've added. And you're going to do that using a high precision balance. And then you're going to transfer that acid that you've measured out into a beaker, or you could use a conical flask to stop it from splashing as you're stirring. And crucially, you're going to re-weigh the weighing boat to determine what mass you've transferred, because there may be a very small amount of residue left behind on that weighing boat. So when you work out your final concentration of the standard solution, you don't want to assume that everything you weighed in that weighing boat actually went in. The alternative to this weighing before and weighing after method would be that you could use rinsings. So it's not always possible to do that depending on the practical you're doing, but for making a standard solution it is, because we're going to dilute all that acid anyway. The third thing that you're going to do is that you're going to add a small amount of deionized or distilled water in order to dissolve this. So it's obviously really important that if we're trying to make 250 centimeters cubed, we're not adding anything close to 250 centimeters cubed of water at this stage, because we're still going to need to rinse everything later. So you're going to add that distilled water or deionized water because of course this is an aqueous standard solution, which is the only kind of standard solution you really make in year 12 and year 13, but it's crucial that you're not talking about dissolving this acid in any solvent other than water. And in order to help it to dissolve, you're probably going to use a glass stirring rod to stir it and make it dissolve faster. Next, you're going to transfer that dissolved acid to a volumetric flask. It's important that we're using a volumetric flask here because that will have a calibration line on it. So you're then going to rinse out all of your equipment, so the beaker you've been using, that glass stirring rod, a funnel if you use that for transferring, and all of those rinsings are going to go into the volumetric flask as well. So if you had any acid residue left on any of your equipment, it's all ending up in that volumetric flask. Then you're going to add more deionized water up to that calibration line, and you want to be using a dropping pipette at the very end so that you can make sure that the meniscus is actually on that calibration line. And then at this final stage you're going to stopper the volumetric flask or the bottle, and you're going to invert it 10 times or shake it. Now it's important when you talk about this that you're mentioning this as the final step. We often see students wondering why they didn't get the mark for stirring or shaking when they've mentioned it earlier in the question, and if you'd done it earlier it might have helped the acid to dissolve, but it's not going to actually play the role that it's playing here, which is to homogenize the solution and make sure that the concentration is the same all the way through it. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that you are finding these walkthroughs of A-level chemistry exam questions useful as part of your revision. If you are, then don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments which topics you'd like me to cover next.